Now live and on lockdown.
Are you ready?
Broadcasting from Edinburgh, Scotland and across the globe.
Listen here.
You're listening to Ramsay Unleashed, Going Beyond Borders podcast on Hearts on Live Radio with your host, Fraser Ramsay.
Hi, this is Afialitha from KingdomBeats.com. Proud to be a sponsor of Ramsay Unleashed, Going Beyond Borders on heartsonglive.co.uk.
We're going to help so I press my buttons correctly. Good evening and welcome to another edition to Ramsay Unleashed, Going Beyond Borders on heartsonglive.co.uk, all the way from Edinburgh, Scotland. And my guest tonight is an ex-fireman, and he is, let's just say, the song I'm about to play to introduce the guy is the song's title and his name as well, so you'll catch the drift, but I think it's just a nice appropriate song to liven up a Saturday night. I'm just trying to, I'm feeling a bit subdued after being in the gym today. I had to force myself to get back to the gym, and if not I was starting to get slightly more lazier and lazier as the time was going on. I thought if I don't get me backside into gear, I'm going to start getting in a very downward spiral. So I'm glad I went to the gym. It was a good, so I'll sleep tonight to say the least. But welcome, it's Saturday night. I'm going to do a slightly different structure to my usual shows with my guests. Instead of talking about what they did in the past, I'm going to talk about what they did today, what they're doing now, and then we're going to work backwards. But hopefully through their story and how their journey has changed their life, it's going to change your life, and maybe you can relate to these guys, well, the people who I interview. You can relate to my guest. And the end of the day is if you want to connect with the guy and talk about stuff, or that's the way to do it. So anyway, before we bring in my guest, let's kick off with this.
I call you, I need you, my heart's on fire. Come to me wild and wild. You come to me
welcome back to Ramsay Unleashed, going beyond borders on heartsonlive.co.uk. You kind of beat a bit of Tina Turner at kick-off a Saturday night with Simply the Best. And lo and behold, it takes me into my guest, LELAND Best. So welcome to Ramsay Unleashed, going beyond borders, and thank you for being a part of the show.
My pleasure, Ramsay. It's always good to connect with you. So thanks so much for having me today.
No, it's been good fun. I know your schedule's as busy as it is as normal. Well, it's a packed schedule you have, and I'm glad you've built it fit in, which is good. So let's. As I say, my structure's going to be slightly different. I'm going to talk about what LELAND's doing now, and LELAND's going to talk about where he is from, but also let's talk about what he's doing now and what he does. And obviously, he does a lot of live streaming. I know that. So let's him kick off with that. So fire away.
Sure. Well, we can start off in any direction, really. Currently, I'm working with a team of individuals over on a page on Facebook, actually, known as Amy Carrier's Classroom. And that is a bunch of us from around the world. We've got people from Southeast Asia, Pakistan, India, South Africa, Sweden, I could name several, Israel, Brazil, and several of us here in the U.S. that are mentoring students from around the world. I think we have 6,000 members currently in that group, but wow. We're just offering free entrepreneurial skills, mentorship from several individuals like myself who just have a skill set that we feel is important for those in the world today that aren't getting the education they want. We use the hashtag Disrupt Education. Other than that, I run my own website known as bcblive.com, or Best Conceptions Broadcasting. And that kind of derived out of an older business we can talk about in a little bit. Other than that, I wrote a book in 2017, which was my live guide for live video streaming. And since then, I've also dabbled in some startups that are taking place in a number of different areas. So I'm kind of behind the scenes as a producer mostly, but I do play host quite a bit now and then. And I have a show that I do Mondays and get vocal at 12 p.m. Eastern, known as Wake Up West Coast. It's lunchtime. So that's what I've been up to lately. That's good. So what's do you have a goal that you want to do going forward? Do you have I know you do a lot of stuff for free, but you've got to make money somehow. So have you got like a set goal in a couple of years' time you want to do X and Y, you know? Well, yeah, a lot of it stems from the fact that the startups I'm working on right now are more aimed toward passive growth and potential rather than having to be hands-on with the business all the time. One actually is involved in some ad-generated revenue through a video game process that we're building. Another is through several larger corporation entities that are looking at advancing into 5G and LiWi. You guys are going to start seeing LiWi before many of us over there, which is the transmission of internet signal through light emitted diodes. Ooh. So we're looking at some pretty cool stuff in the future. And besides that, I'm always going to dabble in the broadcasting end of things. So I like to kind of produce my stream of income through the production end. Well, that's good. People who want to do a show come to me and say, how much do you charge to do a 1 hour or half-hour show? And I do all the behind-the-scenes work, somewhat like people are seeing you do from Facebook right now. That's wave to folk on Facebook, like my royal wave. You know what I mean? So if you're on Facebook and you're watching, hello. And if you're listening to this, you're listening to my guest, LELAND Best from Michigan. Get it right, not Michigan. Right. It looks like Michigan, but it's Michigan. So get shot for the wrong spelling, wrong pronunciation. But yeah, so everyone who's on Facebook, welcome. You're listening to my guest, LELAND Best, all the way from USA, Michigan. So, but yeah, so what's we are going to go down to about your other stuff in your life and the challenging stuff that you've been through and how. But what about we're going to do this backwards anyway. You've gone down a bit of a spiritual journey in your life. So let's, and it's been, you've dabbled, it's certainly in our conversation to sort of obviously prepping for what we're going to talk about in this interview. I mean, a spiritual journey that you've kind of gone, you've dabbled, you've kind of investigated just about everything possible, but you decided on the one you are now. So talk about your journey that you kind of the road that you've gone down to get to where you are now. This is usually one of those topics that not everybody's comfortable with talking about, but I've never really had much of an issue with it because my wife and I met, the woman I'm married to now, met back in 2008 online, actually, on a dating site online. But the way I got to that relationship was basically through the trail of hard knocks. And I had been DJing before I met Jenna. And at the time, I was in my 40s, hanging around a much younger crowd, which was located in Saginaw, Michigan, up in the thumb pit, you might say, what we call it on the map. But I was hanging around a lot of the local pubs there, DJing on a regular basis, and got tied up into a crowd which liked to dabble in drugs. And me in high school, I experimented with things like marijuana and cocaine, but never got into anything seriously troublesome and never got in any trouble for any of that stuff.
Right.
But as an adult, after a second divorce, found myself hanging around the wrong crowds and dabbled in crack cocaine for a period of time that lasted well over 2.5 years. And in that regard, I basically lost myself. I realized that I couldn't control my own behaviors in my own life. Nobody knew what was going on. It was more of a closet thing than anything. And then I finally came out to a friend of mine and said, look, I've got a problem. I need help. And I didn't actually go to seek professional quantitative help that I could say I went to this place or that place. Thankfully, I had enough ambition and willpower to help bring myself out of most of it, but then even had to come clean with my wife after we had married. In Kalamazoo, we were living together after quite a journey with my children at the time. And I had to basically open up to my wife that, hey, we left that town for more than one reason. And one was to get away from the dealer that I would constantly appear in front of over time. So I just found myself having to get away from a bad scenario. And when I did, my life changed. So there's a lot to that brought us to a spiritual journey. And we talked a little about that, Fraser. So if you want to ask get specifics of that,
well,
go ahead.
Tell us. You've obviously, your current wife. You both went down the spiritual journey. So tell us how you both obviously talked about it, and you both talk about your sort of backgrounds. I mean, whether you've been to church or what, not, or you've come out of church and you've gone down this road for this reason. Kind of guide us from the start of why you started both investigating your journey and where you are now. To obviously just the road and sort of document it a little bit.
Well, I found myself one night sitting on the couch, and it was after a night at the bar and smoking and drinking and drugging, and I was literally laying there with my back against the wall, puking on myself. And
oh, you're still there?
Ooh. Yeah, I'm here.
Oh, sorry, I thought you did. Carry on. I thought you dropped off there.
I'm here. At that time, I knew I couldn't control myself, so I was of the ilk. I had a Bible that my grandfather had given me when I was a kid. It was a red leathered Bible. And I'd never really opened it and read it. I played around in the New Testament a little bit, but I never really went from anything besides Genesis and Mark and Matthew here and there, and Revelation, of course, to see what it was about. But when I met my wife online, Jenna, she was very spiritually oriented, and there was a song in my head at the time. It was the Eagles, Desperado. And if you're familiar with the song, it's about a man who's sitting on a fence and can't decide which way to go. So in that process, I learned that I was on that fence, and I had to decide which way I was going to go. And my introduction to Jenna was all based on Scripture. She was basically talking testimonies to me through the Word of God as she knew it as a Christian woman. And I was of the ilk that I was never taken to church much as an adult, but as a kid, I was always there because my grandfather was a fundamental Baptist. And my mother kind of separated herself from that and kept us not so much into church as she did in the house, but always spoke of God and Jesus and that type of stuff to us. So one night we were sitting together, and it was the first Christmas we had together. And that evening we realized after we got in this tree, the next day all the needles were starting to fall off of it. And the story goes from that point on that we talked to the tree company. They'd never heard of such a thing with their trees. Nothing had ever happened like that. So we said, well, we trimmed the bottom of it. We put it in water. We even added, what was it at the time? I think it's bleach you can add to the tree as well to keep it from actually dying and building a sap over it.
Okay.
So this ended up turning into a fiasco because we returned the tree. They gave us the best tree they had, a Fraser fir.
Okay.
Believe it or not, even has your name in it. So how ironic is that? We did Same process. Didn't add any chemicals to the tree this time. We just went ahead and tried to see if we'd messed up. The next day, the same thing started happening. The needles were literally falling off this brand new tree. The house wasn't that dry or anything, but it started to lead us to question things. And my wife, being someone who's done the gamut of different religious beliefs, she was born and raised Christian. She was involved in the Seventh-day Adventist Church for a period, was in the New Age for a while. Just a lot of things in her life that she experienced. So she mentioned, I don't know if you know this or not, but do you know about the origins of Christmas? So we talked about that, and we both went into tears when we realized that the stories we always hear aren't really true. And I don't mean just Santa Claus, but a lot of other stuff. So we investigated for 5 years. We went on a journey of religious. I can't even really explain it because it was all about language and history and archaeology and science and everything. We wanted to know it all, so we took a lot of our time. Literally, I told my wife at the time, I said, I will never be that man that sits down and reads the Bible every day. Just get used to it. She said, well, that's not the man I would have married. The next thing I know, I'm like 8, 10, 12 hours a day studying scriptures and texts and languages and Hebrew and Greek and everything else. So it was an interesting journey and brought us to where we are today. In 2012, I took back my legal birth name after realizing after 45 years of an adopted name that I decided to take my real name back, and we also converted at that time to Judaism. So
Okay.
It's been one of those journeys, you might say.
So what was your adopted name?
My adopted name was Lee Geiger, was what they basically kept me as. My legal name has always been Leland, but I was named after a gentleman by the name of Leland A. Best, was my grandfather.
Oh, right.
And my father's name is James Andrew Best, and I believe it's Andrew, or James Leland Best, one of the two. I think two of ours are reversed.
Okay.
And I didn't meet my real father, my what would you call it, genetic father, but until I was like 42.
Right, okay.
So the similarities between us were amazing. But it came to this realization that I was actually a Best for 2 years before my name was changed legally.
Right, okay.
And something for me was just, no, I want to be the person I was born as. So I wanted to take my name back. Caused a little bit of a rift with my adoptive family at the time because they didn't understand what I was doing. I simply wanted my own personality. I just wanted it was all about me. It wasn't about them. And I still love my family dearly. There are just things that, there are toxicities within families that people have to avoid sometimes. And in my family, that's the case.
Yeah.
So we tend to just watch out who we hang around and who we stick with. Our families exist in a number of forms, whether they're here at home or on the internet. So we have a lot of people that we love dearly on the internet. Biological. Thank you, darling. She gave me the word there.
There we go. Why were you adopted in the first place? What was the reason?
Well, my father supposedly wasn't a very good father, and I don't doubt that he had his issues. He admits openly that he wasn't a very good father at the time. They were in college, and he ended up leaving the marriage because he had been with other women. Okay. And I have a half brother from another mother, you might say, who was a year younger than me that I didn't know until I was about 35.
All right, okay.
There was a part of my family that existed all that time, like him and my grandparents and such, that I never got to meet. And I actually just missed out on meeting my grandmother on that side before she passed. But I didn't meet my great aunt, who was her sister.
Right.
Which was interesting. So
that's good. That's good. Well, so basically, what? Just out of curiosity, just a question. What you mentioned? You obviously you've converted to Judaism. What didn't you believe or thought you weren't true? What was the bits you didn't find true or that you've obviously to lead you? Well, what you were in your investigation? Just out of curiosity, just like pick one or two things if you can,
And it can be polished or it can be raw. And Ramsay, this is the kind of treacherous ground some people tend to stray from because they don't like to talk about these things. But I think the ones that got us the best. Sorry, I didn't hear you.
You're unleashed. Come on, man. This is keeping it real,
right,
man.
good.
Keeping it real.
Well, let's go. All right. This is where it comes down to for us. The Old Testament, as it's known by most Christians, is not old, and it's not an Old Testament. It's the Hebrew Bible, which has been revamped in Christian circles to be interpreted in a much different way than it is in Jewish circles. So when you look at the Hebrew Bible, which are the original books from the 5 books of Moses, all through the prophets and several other books besides, and even those that the Catholic Church either omitted or submitted themselves, are all relative. And if you look at them as a whole, Christianity says that over 300 prophecies have been fulfilled in the Old Testament, which honestly, by Jewish law, have already been fulfilled by other people in other ways, shapes, and forms. Beyond that, what we find is Paul taught a Christianity that was much different than the Jewish belief that Jesus preached, which was that of following God's commandments and loving thy neighbor as thyself, which is actually a Levitical command from Leviticus 18:19. And it goes back to the historicity of Jesus is very hard to envelop and prove factually. Beyond that, it's not to say that Jesus wasn't even just maybe an allegory and as a combination of several individuals over time. We find that Paul has written 14 epistles, yet only 7 were actually penned by his hand. And others, like Matthew, Mark, Luke, are all pseudonyms, however you want to pronounce that, of authors who were not known by that name, but simply wrote in the apostles' stead. So there are a lot of things that, when compiled together jointly and then taken in the context of the time, the language, and especially when you look at translations of certain words and verses in Bibles of different ratifications, then you realize that there's a lot of hand of men involved in these texts, when yet there are still people proclaiming that the King James Bible is the Word of God and there is no other. So you have to be careful with what you believe nowadays, I think, with the fact there are so many differences in testimony and belief. There's 30,000 different Christian denominations. There's several dozen Jewish denominations. And there's other religions around the world that all have a way to God.
Yes,
and I think we need to respect the fact that everyone's revelation of God is different. And whichever path you choose to take to find your connection to that spiritual element in your life is your business. It's not about what other people believe or say or do, but you should always know your own faith and study it out well enough so that you understand it fully and that you're not just a blind follower of faith. And that's what we tend to follow as the truth over whatever someone tells you should believe. That's really the matter at whole.
That's good. Interesting. As I say, if you're listening to this and maybe you agree or disagree with Leland in any way, I'm sure you can connect with him in some way or form, and you can have an informal discussion. It's always good to healthy debates or whatever, you know what I mean? So, but before we come to the next part of Leland's background in life and things he's doing, we're going to take a wee break. We've got our new feature on a regular basis on the show, which is a 60-second singing tip from Benita Charles, benitacharles.com. She's based in New York. She's been providing like music and things to play. She used to sings. So it's about 60 seconds motivation singing tip and a motivation kind of segment. Got some music from Claire Means, and I've got a song from Lisa Moe, and Trucks Are For Girls, so it's going to be quite good. But country music, and Claire Means, who's very popular, she's in California. She does always on Periscope and performing. So we'll be back after 60-second tips and a song from Claire Means, and in fact we'll do Claire Means, and we'll come back with Leland after this. So hold on to your hats, and we'll be back with the man, the best, by name, by nature. That was really cheesy, wasn't it? You still there? That was really cheesy.
How long are you out for? 4 minutes?
We'll be literally 4 minutes. We'll be back in a minute. Back in 4 minutes.
Oh, okay, cool.
Hi, this is Benita Charles from BenitaCharles.com on Ramsay Unleashed, Going Beyond Borders with your 60-second singing tip. Today's tip is about procrastination. According to dictionary.com, procrastination is the act or habit of putting off or delaying, especially something requiring immediate attention. Procrastination can cost you your time, your money, your career, and your dreams. The best way to combat procrastination is with action. Take one small step towards your dreams every day and watch what happens. Just get started. Thanks for listening. Tune in next week for the next 60-second singing tip on Ramsay Unleashed, Going Beyond Borders on heartsonglive.co.uk.
Heartsong Live Radio, your favorite online gospel radio station in Scotland.
Maybe I've never loved, it could be true, but I swear to God that I cared about you. Maybe I don't know just what love is. You offer your hand and I give you my fist. I'm a fiery one, yes it's true, but I'm not that devil in your church pew. I'm a fiery one, I know it's true, but I'm not that devil dancing with you. And you speak of me like I'm the wicked witch, like making love is just some scratch to itch. I should be ashamed of my lustful soul, my desires burning out of control. I'm a fiery one, yes it's true, but I'm not that devil in your church pew. I'm a fiery one, I know it's true, but I'm not that devil dancing with you. And have you ever watched him dance? All his moves he learned from you. You gotta take a look deep inside and see all the demons in you that hide. I wear mine right on my sleeve so they don't get the best of me. But you're always so very stoic. I know you feel it all, but don't dare show it. One day it's all gonna overflow inside, and all the hurt you feel you won't be able to hide. I'm scared of the day you snap, terrified of the day your lovely mask cracks. I'm a fiery one, I know it's true, but I'm not that devil in your church pew. I'm a fiery one, I admit it's true, but I'm not that devil dancing with you.
Hi, this is Athea from KingdomBeats.com. Proud to be a sponsor of Ramsay Unleashed, Going Beyond Borders on heartsonglive.co.uk.
Welcome back to Ramsay Unleashed, Going Beyond Borders, with my guest Leland, Best, all the way from Michigan, USA.
Right.
Yeah, let's get my teeth in there, brain connection. So let's talk a bit more about your life. We've obviously covered your spiritual journey. We covered the reason why you had that, what happened regarding your drug addiction. Let's talk about things in the beginning. Let's talk about growing up, where you grew up, and obviously the young LB, and you obviously. I mean, if you can talk about obviously your divorces. I mean, people go through divorce, and maybe some divorces are messier than others. Some are quite amicable, especially if there's kids involved. So it's good you can talk about the young LB and talk about things like that. Okay.
Well, I'll try to abridge most of it and make it kind of a short form bio, I guess. But I was born and raised here in Michigan. I've never really moved anywhere outside of the state. I've only been to a couple of the borders here when it comes to crossing international realms. So I've only really been to Canada on either end of the country. Never been to Mexico, but grew up in a very loving rural type suburb community outside of Detroit, just about an hour north of that main downtown. And it is primarily a farming community. I grew up on both ends of the spectrum, though. I was born in the heart of the thumb where it's cattle and grain and sugar beets and a lot of corn. But I was also moved down to the General Motors area because my father migrated down into Oakland County as a young individual out of the Vietnam War and decided he wanted to be on the line and build cars. So we ended up near the city. Yet all my family were mostly country farmers, like you mentioned. And in that dichotomy, we had separations and differences and differing opinions, but we got to see them every weekend because at the time, gas was like 30 cents to the gallon. And, I was just a young buck. I was
30 cents to the gallon.
It was at the time. So you could drive anywhere you wanted.
Drive around the world for like about $10 or something.
Yeah. My first car was a 1976 Grand Le Mans Safari station wagon, I call it, because that's what it was. Okay. Like the longest named vehicle and probably the longest vehicle ever made. But it was fun. We grew up in an era of the 70s and the 80s that, like they sing about in all the songs, we drank from a garden hose and we all made it out okay. No seat belts. They were literally able to drink in the automobiles at the time we were growing up, which, of course, led us as young kids to be a little rambunctious. We had our times in high school. I was very well educated in high school because I paid attention. Mm-hmm. But I called myself an academic burnout at the time because I was smoking marijuana as a high school kid. And we had a smoking lounge on either end of the high school. Right. So if you were 18, you could step outside and smoke. Well, the first day in high school, at 15, I'm standing outside in the smoking lounge with a bunch of my friends, and we're huffing away on a cigarette. And I throw it down, I turn around, I look up, and the glass door, here's the principal staring me right in the face. And I'm like, okay, that's not cool. It can't be good. Well, he sends me to the office. He says, get down to the office. And I turn and I walk away from him. I said, okay, fine. And he goes out and investigates the rest of the area. Well, he comes back 20 minutes later to the principal's office and says, oh, you're here. I'm surprised. Like most people just run off and, never show up. Well, it formed a bond between the two of us that never faltered throughout my high school days. And so by the time I was in my senior year, I was doing a lot of math with the same teacher I had in junior high. And I was an independent studying computers for 30 minutes or more. And I just enjoyed it. I had a ball. And began teaching while I was in high school, kids on computers. Wow. And then ended up as an accountant. I used to do actually the books for the Detroit Lions through a private accountant here in Lake Orion, Michigan. And my good accountant friend, who happened to have the same birthday I did, was twice my age when I was 18. He was 36. Came on with this really severe cancer that attacked his legs and killed him within a month. And it was really a shock to all of us. But it took me from that public accounting business to General Motors, where I was paying disbursements for the designers at General Motors that were designing, actually people from your neck of the woods. Are you familiar with a company known as Hotel Whiting?
No, I don't.
Over there?
No, never heard of them.
Well, they were designing the Corvette back in the 80s for General Motors out of the UK. And there were bills upon bills upon bills that had not gotten paid over years of time while they were designing them back in the 80s, 84 through 86. Well, I was the one assigned as a contract employee to General Motors to go through all these invoices. And at the time, I was paying $5 million a month of GM's money trying to figure out where all their design money had to go and clear all these accounts. And I gave away $5 million one day to this guy from the UK that came over as a chartered accountant and asked for all the books. So in that course of things, I actually was in a motorcycle accident.
Oh, that's
it was just I'd handed this guy his money, and they didn't understand. They needed me at work. I was laid up. They found a way to get me out because I was spending too much of their money. Basically left. So this is a good way to get Leland out the door. So they basically said, sorry, if you can't make it into work, we're going to have to let you go. I was like, okay, well, that's whatever. I could have probably sued him, but I didn't. I took up a job out of the newspaper for $4.75 an hour running blueprints for an engineering firm. Mm-hmm. And doing so, I was starting over. And I went from the ground up, started on the board when AutoCAD was in its infancy. I got on the computers as soon as I could. I told myself I was always going to get paid to draw because I loved to draw. And that's what I did for 25 years as a civil designer. Built projects from the ground up like Kmart, Builder Square, CVS, Rite Aid. We did several large structure developments as well in the retail and commercial space for years. In 1995, I went out on my own and created my own design company and ran that for 15 years. So once I got to a point where I was a little bit bored with the design end of things and the CAD work that I was doing, I basically fell out of it around 2000 when I went through a divorce, like you'd mentioned. But wasn't working out, so we changed the tune. But if there's something specific you'd like to know.
Okay. I was going to say, well, what age were you when you got married? You've been 2 divorces, haven't you?
Yes, I have. 2000 was my first divorce from a woman I was married to for 11 years and had 2 children with. Right. And that divorce was mostly my fault. I would say we never really got along, and we irked it on for 11 years, longer than we should have, if we should have really been married at all. But we have 2 beautiful children who, regardless of how things have come about, haven't received their father as much as could have possibly been, thanks to the workings of several things. And that's one, the other parent, the court system. I did everything I could to fight for my kids, but that just didn't seem to work. There was no good avenue to follow. I was pro per. I couldn't afford an attorney, so I did everything on my own. I've literally been in the court system for almost 20 years, pro per, fighting for my kids' rights along with my own. And it's been a struggle. The second divorce was after I found out my wife was a felon thief.
Right, okay. Crumbs.
That kind of trumped everything. So when I separated from that, both of them kind of went on the rampage together, and then I had to fight off 2 ex-wives, basically. And I received more insult from injury with my third child from the second marriage, right, who I haven't seen since he was 7, and he's going to be 18 in about another year and a half.
Wow.
Well, about a year, actually. So he was born in 2002, so he'll be 17 this year.
Wow.
Yeah. And he's found me online. He knows where I'm at, and he professes his love to me online when he can see me, but his mother keeps him away from any contacts on social media, any delivery of emails, written mail, telephone calls. It's pathetic stuff, but right, it's what the courts let him get away with nowadays in a lot of cases, Ramsay. I hate to say it. I see it going around the world in several different countries as well. So it's not just out there. There's a lot of men that would love to be with their kids that are not getting that opportunity they should.
Exactly. It is a very messy situation, and especially over here as well. There's like a group on Facebook called Fathers for Justice. They basically just want to try and see their kids, basically. But it's just it's weird. You think it does take 2 to tango, so to speak. You would think that why does everything side with one and not both? Because technically, the kid's not going to be born without the male, technically. So it's not rocket science. It's not they have a biology lesson. You know what I mean? So you do wonder why it's more. A lot of it is very one-sided. When for the guy, especially for some cases, I know every case is different. But why they want to see fathers who want to see their kids, but they just can't, and they're climbing the walls, and it costs them an arm and a leg. And you think with the money they spend on courts and law, that money could be going towards seeing their kid without having to miss out these kind of take these problems away. It means they could see the kid, they could provide more money for the kid. All that money is just going to paying a lawyer or whatever, but that money could be going easily towards the child's upbringing and these potential in a better circumstances. You do wonder, but it's just a crazy world we live in. Crazy world.
Oh, yeah, and I agree, Ramsay. It's just one of those situations, like you just mentioned, the money that's being used against fathers and the techniques that are being authorized by courts. I'll give you a rundown of what I mean by that.
Okay.
Last October, 2017, I should say, I was in court to reduce my child support because we lost an income stream that we had over here that we relied upon for several years. And in doing so, that's my legal right to go in and say, look, I'm having a financial difficulty. I need to reduce my support for a given period of time until I can get back on my feet and let you know when that is. Well, that went through court from October to December. I received the new orders that stated, here's what you're going to pay for this period of time, and just let us know when your circumstances change. The ex went to the court filing a stipend order, which was to say that I agreed upon something with her in regards to moving the court file from Saginaw County to Kent County, which I didn't do, obviously, because I don't even speak to the woman anymore. She's been in and out of jail several times since we've divorced, and it's just one of those fiascos that she decided to try and pull with the court that said, here's the letter that he signed to say it's okay to send the file over to Kent, which is where she lives. I tried to do it a year before because I was the only one available. We couldn't even find her at the time. Mm-hmm. And they said, no, you can't move the case to the courthouse, which is literally 3 houses down from me.
Okay.
And I would have been able to maintain track of the records. Well, in notifying them every time of where her whereabouts were, because she never would, by law you're supposed to do so, mm-hmm. I kept finding out where she was and letting the courts know where she was located in some fashion or another, whether it was because she'd been jailed or what have you. Well, in the end, March comes along, and I start receiving letters in my mailbox saying, we'd like to represent you from Schuster & Schuster Law Firm for this felony case that you've been warranted or bench warranted on. And I'm like, what? What do you mean there's a bench warrant out for me? I don't know what you're talking about. So I call these attorneys to find out. Then I call the court clerk, which I'm very familiar with her. So I spoke with the court clerk to find out what was up. She told me the Attorney General had filed a warrant for the arrearage that was on the account from 10 years previous while I was unemployed. It's an arrearage that has never been addressed by the courts. It's always been left to meander as a trailing amount of money that's left behind with no payments ever being made to the arrearage based on the order. And let me just say, when you talk to the Attorney General to say, hey, why am I getting a bench warrant put on me? And no one answers except for coming by Monday morning to arrest you and throw you in jail and say $3,500 cash to get your butt out, there's a problem.
Good grief. So
that's where I was at. And that's where I've been waiting now 1.5 years to go to trial over this.
Seriously?
When we could have settled, yeah, I'm still waiting. My trial comes up in March.
Right, okay. For something it could have been settled a long time ago.
Easily. Should have never even been in jail. I don't even. It's just one of those situations. It's really weird.
Well, what we're going to take a brief break, and we're going to talk about, because you have talked about you were in the fire service, or you were doing.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, and we'll talk about that afterwards, and we'll also talk about your book that you recently published last year as well.
Absolutely.
Which was just a couple of months ago. Anyway, but we're going to take another song. Lisa Moen. This is "Trucks Are for Girls." We'll come back with Leland, talk about the fire service, and talk about his new book that he's published. And then he'll have a final word. We'll talk about where people can connect with Leland, and then we'll wrap it up from there. So we're back after Trucks Are for Girls by Lisa Moen.
Explain myself to you, 'cause I never met a man that could do me any justice when he's in the driver's seat of my big blue. I know how to 4x4, shift it too low, put it straight to the floor, check my makeup and flip my curls. Silly boy, too low, put it straight to the floor. Check my makeup and flip my curls. Silly boys, trucks are for girls. I'm just a country girl with a big set of wheels. It doesn't have to be a big deal. So saddle up, boy, come on, let's go. You know this ain't my first rodeo. I know how to 4x4, shift it too low, put it straight to the floor. Check my makeup and flip my curls. Silly boys, trucks are for girls.
Breaker 19. We got a float racing down the highway in our truck.
Trucks are for
You're listening to Edinburgh, Scotland's must-listen-to podcast on heartsonglive.co.uk, your inspirational station.
And welcome back to Ramsay Unleashed, going beyond borders on heartsonlive.co.uk with my guest Leland Best, all the way from Michigan, USA. So you're still surviving, you're not kind of like falling off the perch yet, no?
No, I'm still here. We're all good.
Let's go. So let's talk about you were in the fire service, talk about that.
Yes, sir.
And then we can talk about your book that you published, and then we can tell us where people can connect with you if you want to hire your services and maybe have you on their show.
Sounds great. It was kind of an incidental for me. It was about the time I was in my second marriage, or just prior to it really taking off, that I was in Saginaw, Michigan, and there was offerings available for some new volunteer hires in the local fire department, which served Kochville was the actual town that I was in at the time, because we were handling the dorm apartments for SVSU, or Saginaw Valley State University, and all the kids that were moving in at the time. And my wife at the time had the manager's job, so we stayed on site. I needed something to do, so I decided to go through the academy. And just as we had started the academy, 9/11 took place. So this tells you when I was in the fire department. It was very traumatic for those in New York, obviously, to lose the hundreds of firefighters that they did during that incident. So for me, it was like, okay, what did I get myself into here? I was right in the middle of all the training. But I managed to graduate with a firefighter 1 and 2 status, along with some airport training and some DNR wildland fire training. So I'm very well certified in most of the aspects. Got to drive fire trucks and all that other fun stuff. But about 3 years in or 4 years in, I experienced a fire that kind of changed my attitude a little bit, though. The only reason I really left the fire department was because I moved out of the jurisdiction. But I have a lot of respect for those firemen out there who spend, especially those on the 24, 3 days, 4 days, which means they're on 3 days or 4 days and off for 3 or 4 days straight, because they stay in the firehouse 24/7. Those guys separate themselves from their families all the time, and they risk their lives every day when they go out on the field. I experienced a few of those possible losses of life myself. I was in a flashover one day where my partner and I climbed up from the front of a building, the front of the house, onto the porch landing, which was a canopy over top of the porch, and we were coming into the second story through a window. Well, another fire team from another jurisdiction were on the other end of the building, and we're coming in, attacking the fire with water from that end. And just as we got to the glass, the steam that was created in the second story blew the glass window out in front of us. And my partner suffered a pretty heavy smoke inhalation at the time, and I had to get him off the roof and down to SAS, which was the special teams that were available to assess the people like the fire department and the police officers. And so I had to go back up, and we had my captain and I were in the building. We were poking away at the ceilings, getting basically the burnable structures opened up so that we could see where the fire was at. And there's a point in a fire where it reaches a certain peak temperature, which is around 410 degrees, that everything just flashes. And things get hot very quickly when fire's burning, obviously. But we saw the smoke get sucked down into the walls. And that's a sure sign that the fire's trying to breathe. And because it is a living entity. And when it took that breath, we knew we had to get out. So I told everyone on the other squads to run out the other side of the building. I was the only one on this end that was left. And just as I climbed out the window, I had one leg out. The entire second story went up in flames. So I had to roll off the roof, basically, and find the ladder real fast. But it was a close call. So I realized at that time I had kids, very young kids, as I mentioned, and I couldn't do it anymore. Even though I knew I could physically, there was something in me that changed that said, this just isn't my lifestyle. It's not my type of job to live out as a career. So I changed my mind. I went into fire restoration instead, which was cleaning up after the fact. So I was certified in fire and water damage restoration and mold remediation and things of that nature. Moved to Kalamazoo.
There you go. Fantastic. So that's been your book. You've just published a book as well.
Yes.
What was is your first book, yeah?
Yeah, it is actually. I've written a lot of stuff in the past when it came to my religious adventure there, which again, it was a religious thing that we let go of and remained spiritual. So it was that experience that helped me continue to write. But I went into the live streaming industry and video production, which I'd done in the 80s as well, which we didn't mention, but it was just stuff I did for a couple of years in high school and public television. So for me, it was like a natural transition into this. And I wrote this book based on my experience going back into the 80s and 90s as well. And it's called Best's Guide to Live Stream Video Broadcasting. But it can be found at bestliveguide.com. It's not very hard to locate online. But it's available on Amazon. It's a 106-page manual that I put together as a guide to tell people what type of computer they can build and how to create their own basement studio, you might say, in their own home or office to help their brand develop and maintain a strategy in video production on social media. So that's its primary.
Has it been quite successful? Have you had lots of purchases?
Yeah, I mean, as far as the book goes, it's not something that I tend to worry so much about it making money. I really wrote it for my own sake to know that I could write a book. And in that, I've both shared, given away, sold, and provided just as a template for my own video productions to teach at Amy Carrier's classroom that concept of building one studio. And I think it's common knowledge that everyone should have available to them. So I help people more with the production and consulting end and get paid for that rather than just the book itself.
Okay, cool. Do you plan to, in the future, maybe stretch it, well, maybe with you and the Mrs. B, you fancy stretching your wings a bit further afield by flying over the water into the UK at all at some point?
Yeah, I'd love to, honestly, Fraser, because we're working so closely with people overseas in various countries, whether it's the UK, whether it's Sweden, Italy. I have very good friends with Nazim Beltran, as you're aware. People over in Southeast Asia and Pakistan that also want me to come visit at any given point. My wife has a fear of flying, but we're hoping at some point in our lives that we can both take a trip here and there to meet some people that we've been introduced to here on social media. So, yeah, looking to it one day.
Maybe you can just do what the A-Team did with B.A. Baracus, because he hated flying and they just knocked him out, drugged him just put him to sleep, and he was fine. They woke up and he was at the destination. That could be an option. Remember, you ever watched the A-Team? Did you remember the A-Team? You're older. How old are you? You're older than me, aren't you?
I'm 53 this year.
53, so you've got 10 years on me. So I used to watch the A-Team a lot. I mean, it's about 80. So you can maybe just do that connection. Just should put her to sleep, and you wakes up where in your destination. You won't know things happened. It'd be great. Could be
even my wife, just to throw this out there, Fraser, because she's one that's also on her own journey as well. She's gone through a lot of things in her life that have put her in a position of no prescriptions, no drugs,
All right.
no alcohol, no smoking, no nothing. She's a very well-maintained individual, and she just has some fears that she's still working out. So
interesting. But what does your wife? Well, we could maybe at some point maybe Mrs. B could come and do an interview later on in the future and talk about her journey. It seems like it could be quite interesting with all the stuff, especially with fear. Well, as I say, fears of flying and things like arachnophobia and all that kind of stuff that people have it in general. It's good to talk about these things as well, because people go through them in day-to-day lives, not through choice. But where can people connect with you? Where can people find you online? Where can people buy your book? Where can people buy your services? Etc. etc.
Well, the easiest way to find me, honestly, is to just type my name in Google, Leland Best, and what you should find off to the right is a call button for me, which connects to my Google Voice number. It may get confused in the search engines with the Leland or the Best Western Hotel in Leland, North Carolina, but that's just a fluke because we fight over SEO on the front page of Google all the time. But I've done a lot of things that have shown up on the front page of Google, but bcblive.com is my current website. LELANDBest.com is down currently for revamping, so that will be available soon as well. But for now, it's all about the Best Conceptions broadcasting site, and that contains links to just about anything live streaming, and most of my productions show up there at one point or another. But you can always reach me at Leland at bcblive.com.
Cool. You want to give us a final word?
Sure, Fraser. I think, if anything, what you do here is fantastic. I love the fact that you're broadcasting from overseas to all over the world and putting people that are starting to cross boundaries in this fashion on the limelight, because we're finding that people can talk about real life better when it's outside of the norm, which is typically the mainstream medias that we see nowadays. The stories just aren't right anymore, Fraser. We got to bring real life to the mic and the cameras on our own in order for people to see truth anymore. So glad to be here.
Oh, thank you for your time, and to everyone who's been listening and watching on Facebook Live as well. You can obviously watch the replay on Facebook Live. You can watch the Instagram as a podcast. All Leland's links will be in the show notes as the podcast. I want to say thank you to Leland and thank you to everyone who's been listening and on the replay. And as I say, till next week, we have Nicola C. Austin next week, who's set up a plus-size modelling company, and we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about her journey as well, and what she does. And then after that, we have Brent Mann from BrentMannMusic.com, a country gospel singer who's from Canada and also resides in Tampa, Florida. So we'll be talking about him and his music. And we've got many more guests coming up. So, as I say, tune in each week, each Saturday on Ramsay Unleashed, Going Beyond Borders, and heartsonlive.co.uk. And we will catch up with you next week. Bye-bye now. Right, we're